One of the most striking things about human beings is the moment we come to realize that we are, in fact, naked creatures. I remember vividly when my own son grasped this truth. He wasn't even 3 years old, yet he had already pieced it together. He wanted to put on his own clothing. He insisted on closing the bathroom door with great seriousness, as though guarding some sacred mystery. He refused to be seen unclothed in public, and here's the interesting part. None of this had anything to do with deliberate teaching or conditioning. It wasn't something I had instilled in him through rules or punishments. No, it was something he discovered on his own, a realization that emerged from within. It looked instinctual, almost hardwired, but what exactly does it mean to recognize oneself as naked? That's no trivial question. Nakedness isn't merely the absence of clothing. Nakedness is exposure. It is the recognition of vulnerability, the stark realization that you can be hurt by the environment, by other people, and by your own self-criticism. Nakedness is the state of being judged without protection, judged for beauty, judged for health, judged for strength. It is to stand defenseless in the unforgiving jungle of nature and in the equally harsh terrain of human society. This is precisely what the story of Adam and Eve illuminates. The instant they gained knowledge, they saw themselves in their true condition. Their frailties once hidden were laid bare, their inadequacies glared back at them. Unlike other mammals, who are shielded by the protective armor of their posture and physiology, humans are upright beings with their most delicate regions facing outward. To be human is, therefore, to be doubly vulnerable. And what was their immediate response? They covered themselves. They stitched together crude garments, loincloths, aprons, whatever translation you prefer. These were not just physical coverings, they were attempts to cloak the psyche. Their shame was not merely biological, it was existential. They hid, not only from each other, but from God himself, and who can't understand that, think carefully. Beauty shames those who feel ugly. Strength shames those who are weak, health shames the sick, life itself shames the dying, and the ideal, whether in the form of truth, goodness, or brilliance, shames all of us without exception. That's why Adam and Eve withdrew. They weren't simply guilty of disobedience, they were terrified of judgment, and if you can't empathize with that impulse, then you haven't thought deeply enough. So what should we do with this knowledge? Should we abolish ideals altogether? Should we pretend that beauty, health, or excellence don't exist just so no one feels ashamed? That's not a solution. It's a disaster. It would condemn everyone to mediocrity while ensuring we feel ashamed anyway. Do you really want the Grace Kellys, the Monica Bellucci's, the John von Neumanns of history to vanish, simply to protect fragile egos? No, their existence is a gift, even if it reminds us of our inadequacy. I would rather feel humbled by greatness than live in a world without it. It is the price we pay for ambition, for direction, for something to strive toward, and yet the Genesis story doesn't let us off the hook. When God comes for his evening walk in Eden, he finds Adam missing. God calls out, though one might imagine he hardly needed to ask, being omniscient, "Where are you?" Adam, trembling, replies, "I heard you, but I was naked, so I hid." That response contains the entire human tragedy in one sentence. We are naked, we are exposed, we are ashamed, and because of that, we recoil from truth itself. We avoid stepping into the arena where chaos meets order. We avoid walking with God, so to speak, because his standards are impossibly high, and we know it. But Adam doesn't stop there. He takes the coward's path. When God asks if he ate the forbidden fruit, Adam points the finger not just at Eve, but at God himself. "The woman whom you gave me the fruit." Think about the magnitude of that betrayal. In one breath, Adam undermines his partner and indicts his creator. The first man becomes the first accuser, the first resentful cynic, and tragically, that pattern has repeated endlessly throughout history. How many men, spurned by rejection, first shrink in shame before a woman, then curse God for their misfortune, then lash out at the world in bitterness? This is not just myth, it is psychology, it is lived reality. Eve, for her part, has at least the serpent to blame, and the serpent, we later learn, is no ordinary trickster, but the embodiment of Satan himself. She was deceived by the greatest deceiver of all. Adam, however, had no such excuse. His downfall was cowardice, pure and simple. The consequences are severe. God curses the serpent to crawl forever in the dust. To Eve, he pronounces sorrow in childbirth and a complicated relationship with her husband, desire entwined with subjugation. Does this sound like tyranny? Perhaps, if you read it simplistically. but I would argue it is descriptive, not prescriptive. It reflects biological reality. The evolution of human consciousness created a brutal dilemma. Babies were born with massive, unfinished brains that required years of nurturing, while women risked their lives in childbirth. Dependence on men, unreliable as they often were, became a structural fact of human life. And Adam, his curse was work, unceasing, backbreaking, often fruitless labor. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread, says God. And what does that mean? It means that once you can see the future, once you are conscious, you can no longer live in innocent immediacy. You must sacrifice the present for tomorrow. You must toil, plan, and endure. Paradise is gone. History has begun. Then comes the final blow. Adam and Eve are banished from Eden. They are thrust into the harshness of reality, and God stations a flaming sword at the gate to ensure they never return. Why such cruelty? Why not let them eat from the tree of life and be immortal immediately? Perhaps because immortality is not something handed out cheaply. Perhaps heaven must be earned through the long process of bearing suffering responsibly. So we arrive back at the haunting question, why would someone willingly care for a dog, tenderly administering its medicine, but neglect themselves? The answer is now clearer. Humanity descended from Adam is ashamed, guilty, resentful, fearful. Each of us knows our flaws more intimately than anyone else possibly could. No one knows the depth of your insufficiency better than you. That makes it tempting, almost inevitable, to believe you are unworthy of care. At least the dog is innocent. At least the dog is unself-conscious. But that is not the end of the story. The narrative presses further into morality, into suffering, into the very fabric of order and chaos. And the lesson is this: to be human is to be naked, flawed, and ashamed, but also to be tasked with rising above that condition, to take responsibility for existence itself. That is the destiny of the naked ape. When Adam and Eve's eyes are opened, they do not simply notice their nakedness or the burden of labor that follows. Something far deeper emerges. They come to perceive the reality of good and evil. The serpent had promised this very outcome. Your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. But what does that cryptic phrase actually mean? Haven't we already accounted for shame, for toil, for temptation? Why introduce this new element unless it carries a significance beyond the obvious? For me, the final clue lay in the recognition of nakedness itself. It took me years to work out the implications. Consider animals. A dog is a predator, a cat too. They hunt, they kill, they consume. It's brutal, yes, but it is not evil. They operate within the boundaries of instinct. They do not carry guilt for their behavior. They are not plotting cruelty for its own sake. We, however, take them into our homes, care for them, and even medicate them when they fall ill. Why? Because their aggression is not moral failing. It is simply hunger, necessity. A wolf is not wicked. It is just a wolf. Humans are different. We are aware of our own fragility. We know exactly where we can be wounded, what causes us pain, what strikes at our dignity. And because of that knowledge, we also know how to wound others with terrifying precision. That is the mark of self-consciousness, not just recognizing ourselves as limited and mortal, but recognizing that others are as well. Nakedness in this context becomes symbolic of vulnerability, and to know vulnerability in yourself is simultaneously to grasp how to exploit it in another. This is where evil enters the picture. It is one thing to survive by predation, another thing entirely to inflict suffering because you know you can, to torture, to humiliate, to break another person deliberately. That is a leap beyond nature. It is a moral catastrophe as seismic as the very emergence of self-consciousness. This, I believe, is what the story of Eden is trying to convey, that the knowledge of good and evil is the knowledge of how to destroy, with intent, those who are like ourselves. Think about it. No lion invented the rack, no wolf devised the Iron Maiden, no tiger designed the thumbscrew. Only human beings could create instruments of torment designed not merely to kill, but to make suffering itself the goal. That is evil, pure and simple. Animals cannot manage it. Humans can, and that's why the doctrine of original sin, so despised in our modern intellectual climate, still rings true. Because each of us carries the capacity for conscious malevolence, and each of us knows it. Our ancestors, through their choices, selected not only for intelligence, but for awareness, an awareness that came bound with moral responsibility, and with that responsibility came guilt. If you lack guilt entirely, if you never sense your own corruption, you are not merely free of shame, you are close to psychopathy. Every culture, every mythology has wrestled with this uncomfortable fact. The Mesopotamians imagined that mankind was created from the blood of a monstrous being, Kingu, born from the wrath of chaos itself. They intuited what we still feel, that humanity carries something terrible within. And so we doubt ourselves, we suspect our own motives, we ask whether humanity itself was a mistake, we even fantasize, though few admit it openly, that it might be better if the earth were purged of people altogether, so that existence could return to the unconscious brutality of the animal world. Who hasn't in some dark hour thought such a thing, even fleetingly? But we are not animals. We bear this weight, this knowledge, this unbearable freedom. The question is not whether we have the capacity for evil. We do. The question is what we are going to do about it. When the story tells us that Adam and Eve had their eyes opened, it doesn't just mean they suddenly noticed that they weren't wearing pants. It means something far deeper, something that marks one of the great turning points in human consciousness. They discovered not only their nakedness, not only the necessity of work and suffering, but something infinitely more terrifying, the knowledge of good and evil. And that's no trivial matter. That's not some decorative detail added to a myth. That's the kind of claim that sits at the foundation of our entire moral awareness. Now, what does that actually mean? The text says, "Ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." That's an unbelievably bold claim. To know good and evil is to shoulder a godlike responsibility. It's to stand at the edge of chaos with the power to create and destroy, and that's precisely what human beings have done. Look, cats kill mice. Dogs tear apart rabbits, predators devour prey, but we don't accuse a wolf of murder. We don't haul a lion into court. Why not? Because an animal acts according to its nature. It isn't evil, it isn't guilty. It's hungry, it kills to survive, that's what predators do. But humans are different, and why? Because we're self-conscious, we know we're vulnerable, we know precisely where the body breaks, where pain enters, where death strikes. And the instant you know that about yourself, you also know it about everyone else. You know how to hurt, how to humiliate, how to terrify, and once you have that knowledge, you face a choice. Do you use it to alleviate suffering, or to magnify it? That's the birth of good and evil. That's the fracture in being that haunts us to this very day. Think about it. Only human beings could invent the rack, the thumbscrew, the gulag, the concentration camp. No animal designs torture chambers. Only we can inflict suffering for the sheer sake of suffering. That's a terrible realization, but it's true. And that's why the doctrine of original sin, so unpopular in modern intellectual circles, remains as relevant as ever. The idea is simple. There is something fundamentally corrupt, fundamentally broken at the heart of human nature. Now, people don't like that claim, they resist it, they say, human beings are basically good. Well, maybe. But what do you call Auschwitz? What do you call the millions starved to death by ideology in the 20th century? What do you call a child deliberately abused by the very parents who should protect him? If that's basically good, then words have lost their meaning. We don't just stumble into error by accident, we choose malevolence, often deliberately, with our eyes open, and worse, we enjoy it. That's evil. That's not mere ignorance, that's willful participation in destruction, and what comes with this knowledge of good and evil, guilt, shame, the sense that we don't measure up, not only to others but to the very structure of reality. Every human being alive feels it, we can pretend otherwise, but deep down we know, you've felt it, you can't lie to yourself about that. There's a heaviness in the human soul, the awareness that we are capable of betrayal, cruelty, deceit. Without that awareness, you're a psychopath. And if you've never looked inside yourself and seen that shadow, then you're blind. Ancient stories understood this. The Mesopotamians, for example, believed mankind was fashioned from the blood of a chaos monster, born from violence itself. They weren't naive about human nature. They knew what lurked in us, and maybe they overstated it, but the point remains. People have suspected for millennia that there's something fatally wrong with us. So what do we do with that? Some conclude, well, maybe human beings should never have existed in the first place. You've probably had that thought, even if only fleetingly. The world would be better off without us. No more cruelty, no more destruction. Just animals, trees, oceans, brutal, yes, but innocent. And if you've never had that thought, you haven't examined the darkness in your own heart carefully enough. But the problem is, what's the alternative? Are we really prepared to abandon the entire human enterprise because of our flaws? Should we curse being itself? Should we walk away from the possibility of love, beauty, art, courage, compassion, because we can also choose hate and violence? That's the existential dilemma. We're creatures who know good and evil, and that knowledge is unbearable because it means every action carries moral weight. You're not just eating an apple, or lying to a friend, or betraying a promise. You are participating in a cosmic drama. You're aligning yourself with either order or chaos, with creation or destruction. That's a crushing responsibility, but here's the thing: responsibility is also the only way forward. It's the antidote to despair. Because if we are capable of great evil, then we are also capable of great good. If we can torture, then we can also heal. If we can betray, then we can also remain loyal. And if we can choose chaos, then we can also build order. That's why the story matters. That's why Genesis is not just some primitive superstition. It's the distillation of the deepest truths about human nature. To know good and evil is to be awake. It's to realize that life isn't neutral. Every decision matters. Every action tips the balance. And so the question becomes, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you lie, manipulate, exploit? Or will you tell the truth, lift the burden, aim upward? That's the moral challenge placed before Adam and Eve, and before every one of us, and it hasn't gone away. It never will.